be very disciplined. So hopefully we can get through everything that we need to. But if it looks as though we're going to run out of time, we have got a couple of items that we could defer, and which we will do to enable us to have a full time to discuss some of the heavier items, but hopefully that won't be required. So, if I start properly, good evening members, and welcome to this Policy and Resources Committee meeting on the 28th of June. Before we start the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated to enable Mr. Bailey on my right, your left, to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place, and I can't see anybody indicating, so I assume nobody wishes to do that. Have we got any apologies for absence?
I've received apologies from Councillors Borton, Perry and McLaughlin.
Thank you. And notification of substitute members. Can I start with
Councillor Butler for Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Councillor Burton for Councillor Perry.
Thank you. And
Councillor Garton for Councillor Borton.
Thank you. I don't see any visiting members, so I assume we don't have any lurking in any corner anywhere. And disclosures by members and officers, are there any? Nobody's indicating. Disclosures of lobbying, has anybody been lobbied? No, nobody's indicating. To consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. Councillor Burton.
Concerning lobbying, have we just been lobbied on Junction 7? Where that may relate to one of the items?
No? I think it was merely at this stage it's an information-giving session. I don't think it can be taken as lobbying. It does not represent anything where you are, where you've been heavily committed or asked to be committed to anything. I'm not asking you to go one way or the other. All right, thank you. So I just said this.
And there's already a Section 106 agreement.
Yes, and I have just had it pointed out to me there is already a Section 106 agreement. So, all right. I've said the wording about disclosure of exempt information. We do have items on the papers tonight. Is it agreed, members, that we take that as part 2? Thank you very much. Right, minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of April, you will find on page 1. If I go through it first of all for accuracy, so page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9 and page 10. Do you agree that that's an accurate record? Thank you. And can I ask that I can therefore sign these minutes? Agreed. Thank you. We also have minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday the 23rd of May 2017 on page 11. There's only the one page. Do you agree that this is accurate? Could I sort of hear a fulsome? Thank you. And so I can sign those as accurate as well. Thank you. We move to item 10, and I believe we do have a presentation of a petition. Is that correct? Thank you. Let me just... So, Mrs. Kenwood, if you would like to come to the microphone. It's 5 minutes. If you would like to read the petition, and you have 5 minutes then to talk to it.
Okay, this is a petition that I started to collect signatures on the day of the Civic Parade. There were 4 of us doing that. There was myself, Toby Lee, Amy Baker and Karen Forward. The title of the petition is Maidstone and the Weald Action Group Petition to go to Maidstone Police. We, the undersigned, are committed to working together to making Maidstone a town that we can all feel proud of again, a town where all are good role models for our children. We want our voice to be heard and respected when it comes to spending public money and making planning decisions. We believe that council tax and business rates are too high and that taxpayers' money is being wasted in Maidstone. We will identify where public money can be managed more efficiently. We expect Maidstone Police to pursue all opportunities to generate revenue and to change their attitude of helping the rich to get richer at the expense of the rest of us. We expect Maidstone Police to change their attitude to our children today. I handed in a few hundred signatures of this petition to Sam Bailey on Monday, and then I went down to Maidstone Police Station and I handed in the same bunch of signatures, and I got a receipt at 3:15 on Monday. I also put a complaint in at the same time and a request read this petition. What I'd like to say is that I have been election campaigning, and I did on the 26th of April ask a question which I don't believe was accurately answered, but it has been since then. And we would now say that, having spoken to a lot of people in the area who have moved in from other areas and are currently living in Maidstone, that it's quite popularly believed that council tax and business rates are too high, that we are paying council tax and water rates, for example, that are higher than rates in Bromley and are par to what they're paying in London. It has been suggested that because we are paying this level of rates, there's less disposable income in the town and less profits for the shops too, and this has not got a good boding really for what's going to happen to shops and businesses in the town centre. We're concerned about the amount of money that was spent on land last year and whether we actually really need more offices in the town when some of them have already been converted into flats. We're concerned about planning decisions because it seems that a lot of mistakes are made and then a lot of money is spent trying to sort them out, and perhaps they could have been more effectively managed in the first place. I am concerned even today about the management of the homeless in the town by the council. I am concerned that before council tax is set next year, that there are things that can be done that can make council tax better managed, and I am concerned basically that I know Maidstone Borough Council sends out council tax bills on behalf of itself and, for example, the police, and I know that more could be done there to help what's going on in the town. So that's where I'm coming from. My experiences of the police for 37 years have not been good, and this year I've still got problems with them, and I'm concerned that they are not making effective use of the council tax money that's been raised for them via the council.
Thank you, Mrs. Kenwood. We accepted this petition because it does very clearly have issues in it that relate directly to Maidstone Borough Council, and we need to take those issues very seriously. Clearly you have concerns about other issues, the police in particular. Can I say that the Police and Crime Commissioner, Matthew Scott, is responsible for setting the strategic priorities of Kent Police, and he also sets the Kent Police precept of council tax in consultation with the Police and Crime Panel. So it might be a good idea to direct this petition not just by handing in at the police station, but actually directly contact him, and we can give you the details of how to do that. The other thing I do need to make very clear is that business rates are not set by Maidstone Borough Council. They are set centrally by the DCLG along with the Valuation Office Agency. And again, if you believe the rates that we are levying in Maidstone are too high, then you need to direct that part of your inquiry to them, because we have to implement what they are actually telling us that we must levy in this area. I'd like to throw this open to any committee members who may wish to answer or say anything. If anybody wishes to add anything or yes, Councillor Blackmore. Oh, sorry.
I would like just to say one thing. I was actually approached on the day and asked to sign the petition, but I don't remember being told of its contents. I was just asked if I'd like to sign it.
That wasn't me. Do you know who that was? Oh, sorry.
I do, actually. I think that was Mr. Hayden Lee who approached me and asked me to sign it. Didn't say what it was about, didn't take his sunglasses off, which, quite frankly, I thought was a little bit rude. Because if you want someone to sign something, shouldn't you actually be looking at them eye to eye to explain what it's about?
I didn't know until the day who was going to turn up, and basically, you know, those that turned up took the petitions, they were told what they were supposed to do, and obviously I didn't go around supervising what people were doing, but I do understand that they were actually reading through this and they were handing out another sheet. Did you not get another sheet? Well, Emily Fermor, I saw her being approached by Karen Forward, and I know that there was another sheet with it, and that she handed out the sheet. Emily read the petition and didn't sign it, but took the sheet away to consider. So I apologise if Toby Lee didn't do quite what was expected of him, but I certainly saw Karen do it.
I think this is not the appropriate place to discuss this. As far as the council is concerned, the petition has been handed in appropriately, has been checked, but obviously here's a lesson to learn for the future about ensuring that people who are collecting petition signatures are aware of exactly what they should do in relation to enabling people and in fact ensuring that people do read a petition to know exactly what it is they are signing for. I won't call you in, Councillor Firmer, because I think that really the purpose of this is for us to take seriously the petition that we have in front of us. Certainly, if nobody has anything they wish to say, then we will take this away and we will look at the parts that actually relate very directly to Maidstone Borough Council, and if necessary we will respond, and all councillors will know what the response is. Thank you very much for bringing it to us. There are no question and answer there's no question and answers required today. So we move immediately to item 12, which is the committee work programme you will find on page 12. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a couple of updates on the work programme to report. The third item on here, land disposal policy, which was scheduled for this evening's meeting, has been deferred. We're hoping to bring that to your meeting in July. And further down, the annual governance statement and local code of corporate governance, which was July, is actually on this evening's agenda. So otherwise, the work programme in front of you stands.
Members, have anybody anything they wish to say? Just to point out, because I know how concerned this committee has been about the flood issue, you will find that that is on this forward plan. So you will be getting another report on that shortly. If we move now then to item 13, the report of Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, annual statement. Sorry, am I missing something? Corporate Governance and Local Code of Corporate Governance on page 14. I'm just turning to my nice scrib sheet. And is it you, Mrs. Thank you, Mrs. Woodhouse. Would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. The annual governance statement format has been changed. So we've moved away, the idea is to move away from a list of compliance to commentary on compliance with each of our governance principles. So you should see a clear difference between the annual governance statement and the local code of corporate governance. The overall conclusion drawn is that we are compliant and our governance arrangements are fit for purpose. At the end of the governance statement, there is a table of action for 2017-18, which includes actions to follow up audit reviews that have been rated as weak, contract management, further work on risk and improvements to report writing. A new local code of corporate governance is attached to Appendix B, and this code covers the 7 principles identified in the new Delivering Good Governance in Local Government Framework 2016. So that's why it varies from the principles you can see in the annual governance statement. And it lists the actions required to comply with the code and evidence. The Audit, Governance and Standards Committee considered both documents on Monday. They have requested it be made clearer who the Section 151 officer and monitoring officer are in the annual governance statement, so I will add in the names of the officers. And they've also requested that under the local code, we add in the parish charter as part of the list of evidence under Principle B of the code and the statement of community involvement under Principle C underneath the local plan. So they've asked for those additions. Thank you.
Before I call anybody to speak, Councillor Garland, as you arrived a little bit late, can you please confirm whether you have any disclosures to make and disclosures of lobbying? Thank you very much. Councillor Blackmore, it's over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Bearing in mind this document has already been through the Audit Committee, and I'm sure they probably teased it and did whatever to death, I actually think we should move the recommendation on the paper, accept the comments that Mrs Woodhouse has made about the comments coming out of the Audit Committee, and actually move on, because I don't actually believe there's anything sensible we can add to it. So I'd like to move the recommendation on page 14, please.
Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor Cox. I'm only going to... I don't think I need to make a formal amendment here, but we have actually sat here and reviewed it. So the recommendation should just be to approve. Are you all happy with that? Right, could I have a show of hands then, please? Those in favour? Sorry.
But shouldn't it be subject to the recommendations that the Audit Committee made? Because I'm not sure that that is actually clear here.
Yes.
So I think we do want those taken on board, if that's okay.
Hang on a minute, I'll go to Mr Bailey.
So that's an addition of, subject to the recommendations the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee made, comma, and then, okay. See what you're saying.
Show of hands. No, you're quite right. Show of hands, please. Those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move to item Agenda 14 on pages 49 to 66, which now, is this going to be Ms Collier or it is? Thank you. Would you like to lead in, please?
Thank you and good evening, members. In line with the public sector equalities duty and the setting of the new strategic plan, we have undertaken a refresh of the Council's equalities objectives and equalities policy. An extensive review has been undertaken to evaluate the Council's current performance in relation to our duty, and areas of particular success have been set out in the report on page 51 and 52. The revised objectives and actions have been based on this review, picking up any areas where we think we can improve performance. And the Members' Sounding Board was approached in relation to shaping any objectives that are mentioned for members. The objectives and related actions can be seen at Appendix A, and the draft policy can be seen at Appendix B. Committee has previously agreed that the Council had 3 roles in relation to our equalities responsibilities. These are as a community leader, as a service provider and as an employer. And the objectives have been set out under each of these headings. And I'm happy to take any questions, or Ms Sweeney, who undertook the review, happy to take any questions.
Councillor Burton, I have you.
Thank you, Chair. I may have missed this, but could you just clarify page 65 for me, where it says insert once agreed, insert once agreed? Are we adopting this?
That page shouldn't have been included in the agenda. It's been deleted. It doesn't really have any purpose. We want to keep the objectives separate to the policy document. Otherwise, we'd have to refresh the policy every time we refreshed or updated the objectives. So that was put in there in error.
Do you want to come back on that?
Good job we asked, wasn't it?
I do think we have to make it clear when we're making the if we make the recommendation, that that is without that page, if that is the case. Otherwise it becomes quite confusing. Councillor Blackmore.
I have to say I'm completely puzzled here. So we've got our equality policy and objectives, page 61. So the objectives action plan, is that going to be attached to the equalities policy and objectives on page 61? It's not.
Mrs Woodhouse, do you want to... Sorry, did...
No, it won't. They're 2 separate documents. We've just revised both things at the same time.
Councillor Bryce.
So is the action plan just an initial document to say this is likely to be the roadmap we will take, but we're going to further consult with the member sounding board and, you know, just to refine that?
No, we've already consulted with the member sounding board on the actions that related to members, the objectives that related to members, and the objectives have been, you are agreeing the objectives today, along with the actions that show how we're going to deliver those objectives.
Councillor Blackmore, come in, and I'm just going to have a brief...
I think I might have worked this out, but I'm not sure. Just one quick question. So on page 65, you're not deleting the whole page. You're keeping Equality Objective 1, but you're taking out the bit that says why we have chosen this objective and how we will measure how successful this bit has been. Is that right? So we'll have Equality Objective 1, we will engage with residents in an open and meaningful way. Equality Objective 2, we will ensure our services are inclusive, etc., etc. Is that right? And then those bits in between are taken out. Is that right? A little bit of clarity, please.
On the previous page, on page 64, the community leader, service provider and employer are set out as roles. So they're the 3 roles that the council has. And what we were going to do, and this page was deleted, but it's in the agenda and it's caused confusion. So we've got the 3 roles, and then we've got our objectives that sit beneath those separately as set out in the action plan. So page 65 and 66 don't exist in the policy document going forward, and the objectives, which are attached to Appendix A as a separate document, will be refreshed on an annual basis. The policy is from 2017 to 2021.
If you just bear with us a minute, we think the documents are printed in the wrong order. Can we just hold it for a moment, and then we'll try and actually give complete clarity.
They're not. Report appendices as set out in the report on page 55 say Appendix A is the equalities objectives, which is Appendix A, page 56. Appendix B is the policy itself, which is at page 61, as set out in the report as Appendix B. So I'm sorry that page has caused confusion, but hopefully that's sorted it out.
I'm just going to bring the Chief Exec in.
So if I may attempt to clarify, I think the two appendices are set out in the order that they are signalled in the covering report. But when you read a policy and objectives, you might expect the action plan to follow that. So if we simply consider everything that is within the papers as a whole, we have a covering explanation in the report, the covering report. We have the refreshed, newly proposed equalities policy objectives in the document with the hands on the front. And then the actions that will be taken in association with those policies and objectives are in the table that's labelled Appendix A. Yeah?
Members, I apologise because
better?
familiarity breeds contempt, and that's why I think I missed it. So, Councillor, sorry. Tony, would you like to come in?
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I think overall, I mean, we're complying with what we need to comply to, and it's fairly mothered in apple pie. I do think the document needs a bit of a proofread, though. I mean, looking at page 63, where it talks about teamwork, it says achieve, and achieve has got a superfluous I, and above it, where it talks about, it says achieve, I-E-I-V-E. And also there's a semicolon where it should be a comma, and there's just a few bits and pieces, and they will be picked up if we don't pick up on them.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything they wish to? Thank you, Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Forgive me, but I would feel happier if page 65 wasn't there at all, because it's still throwing me. I understand totally the policy and the action plan. I can't grasp. Could you just help me? Can't we just do away with page 65?
Sorry, as Councillor Burton rightly, actually helpfully, and we should have put it in our introduction to the report, that page has been deleted. An early version of the document has been uploaded to the agenda, and I apologise for that. I'm really sorry. It shouldn't be there. Please, when you make your decision to approve the document, if you do, I suggest you make it clear that doesn't include those pages, because it's unnecessary, it's superfluous, and it's created confusion, so I'm sorry.
Councillor Garden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may be digressing a little bit from equal objectives and equal opportunity of policies. However, page 56 of the action plan, creating a single point of contact for the organisation for all community groups and forums, etc., etc. And then we're talking very much about data, officer data policy. I don't want this document or this action plan to be taken as an excuse to more data streamline, website streamline things. I've already got complaints from the community saying we can no longer properly approach the council if we want to file a complaint because there's nobody answering the telephone and there's no human contact.
Ms. Collier, do you wish to respond?
In terms of having one point of contact, that's in relation to Involve, who we attend a number of their different groups, their different community voluntary groups, but what we have found is that there isn't a coordinated approach in terms of the council attending them, so we won't necessarily always have the right person turning up to discuss the right issues. So actually it's to overcome some of those problems that you're talking about, is to ensure that we always have somebody attending, that we always have the right officer attending, and that we're getting communication out to hard-to-reach groups on particular difficult issues.
All right. Do you want to come back, Councillor Garden?
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And as I said, I was slightly digressing from the objectives of this plan. However, there is a concern about over-computerisation on the public portal of the council. So maybe the team can take that into consideration in their further works. There are areas in Maidstone which are not accessible to computer users simply because there's no broadband available.
Councillor Garden, I think we still have a councillor input into a communications group. I suggest if you, and as a member of your group on that, if you make clear what your concerns are, I think that could correctly go to that discussion group to be addressed. Councillor Burton and then Councillor Firman.
So just so that I'm really clear, when we come to move the recommendation, if that's what we're going to do, we are just adopting the 2 pages and the appendices. Okay. Right. That's what I just wanted to be absolutely certain of, because the recommendation is not clear at all as it stands.
Hold on a minute, I'm going to ask Mr Bailey to read out. So it would be exactly as it is, agree that the equalities policy and new objectives be adopted with the removal of... subject to the removal of... That's page, just a minute, it's page...
Removal of 65 and 66,
yes.
Subject to typographical amendment.
Yes.
But then the question is, do we have the appendix attached to that, or are we just adopting the 2 pages?
See, they're supposed to have the appendix. You're adopting both, and you should have it. Have you not got it?
Well, I have Appendix A, and only Appendix A, but the recommendation does not refer to Appendix A, unless, for clarification, you are saying that is part of... Right? That's what I just want to be crystal clear on, because I'm not at the moment.
Okay, so to agree the equality policies and new objectives adopted, subject to amendment of the typographical amendment, including Appendix A, and deleting pages, whatever they were, 65 and 66.
If you just moved that, I second it.
Subject to typographical, yes, okay, amendment. Removal of pages 67 and 66, and inclusion of Appendix 1. And new objectives, yes, but sorry, I'm going to say this online here. What has been correctly pointed out is that although it says the new objectives would be adopted, it does not mention that they're contained within Appendix A. Have you got that now? So do you want to read that out for the committee? Hold on just a second. You've got it. Do you want a minute to just confirm it?
So, agrees that the equalities policy and new objectives at Appendix A, if we put that in there, that will make that clear that it's Appendix A, be adopted, subject to typographical amendments and removal of pages 65 to 66. Is that clear?
If that's clear at this...
I'm just going to be a bit picky and say Equalities Policy 2017 to 2021, rather than just Equalities Policy.
Are you happy with that as the seconder? I'm happy as the proposer. Councillor Gooch.
Sorry, Chairman, but it's quite clear that the equalities policy, we were informed, was Appendix B. And we haven't mentioned Appendix B, have we?
If this goes on much longer, I think there's only one way forward for this, and that is that I'm going to actually move from the chair that we defer this, that we get it right for all our concerns, and we... You don't think it's needed? Well,
it's only semantics, isn't it?
Okay, so if I may, it seems to me, listening to what has been said, that very little has been raised concerning the objectives, the policy or the actions. Yeah? The confusion is in the naming of the different parts of the document. As it stands at the moment, the policy and objectives are in Appendix B. The action plan is in Appendix A. So if we simply say that we agree, or you agree rather, the equalities policy 2017 to 20 and the new objectives as presented in appendices A and B, subject to typographical corrections and the removal of pages 65 and 66, I think we should be there.
Councillor Blackmore.
I'm sorry, I don't like to disagree with the Chief Executive, but it does say here quite clearly 2017 to 2021, not 2020. Where does the 2020 come from? Now I'm confused.
Sorry, I intended to say 2021. Yeah.
I'm going to apologise to the committee because I should have picked this up myself, that it was confusing. But we have been having discussions, certainly Mr Green and myself have been having discussions about, and this is not anything said against officers who work really hard, but that we all have to sharpen up on the written word because inevitably we either get confused, we don't understand it. So we are going to do a lot of work collectively about trying to sharpen up on, particularly that what we've been talking about quite a bit is how we can improve this front page of every report, because we are having issues coming up through nobody's fault that the way this front page is set out lacks some clarity. So, officers, this is not directed directly at the officers here tonight. It is a general comment about a front page that everybody, I think, has said we could do better, and we'll endeavour to do that. And my apologies to the committee, because I should have been more careful about looking at what may or may not be clear. So, have we got? Is somebody? Well, I'm happy to move from the chair. I think Councillor Burton had already seconded it, if he's happy to go with that amended wording.
It does the job. I don't think it's right, because you refer to two appendices and not actually the policy of which the appendices are. But I think we all know what's meant, and I am happy to second it just to move things along.
May I have a show of hands for those in favour, please? And against? And abstentions? That's one. And in view of how difficult this has been, I do want to thank the officers for actually the baseline work they've put into this, which has been considerable. So thank you. So we move to pages 172 of agenda item 19, which is the update on Maidstone East. Am I right? No. I'm sorry, my pages now are totally out of order. Page 67. So page 60, I think I'm going to go home and come back and start again. Page 67, which I will turn to. Right. It is the report on the strategic plan performance update quarter 4, 2016 to 17. Is that Mrs. Woodhouse? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Hopefully this will be less confusing, and I apologise for the last report. 13 out of the 16 performance indicators reported have hit target, which shows a strong performance for the last quarter of the year. Areas where performance could be improved are the percentage of waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting. And as mentioned in the report in March, we did see an uplift in performance. That was the last month of the quarter, so we're hoping to see that continue to improve. Crime in the borough has also seen a 20% increase, with the most likely reason being attributed to crime recording by the police. I will say that CHI committee raised concerns regarding the data and the results, and that was discussed at that meeting and will be followed up in due course, and may well be followed up when they meet as the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee and talk to the Safer Maidstone Partnership. Areas where there's strong performance across a number of services. User satisfaction at the Leisure Centre achieved the target for the first time this year. Street cleanliness also hit target. The number of disabled facilities grants completed was exceptionally high, and performance continues to be strong in the processing of major planning applications, and the number of affordable homes delivered was on target, and homeless prevention is above target this quarter. So overall, positive report. But I'm happy to take questions if members have them. Thank you.
Members, does anybody wish? Councillor Gooch?
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate I should have attended the relevant committee, but I was very interested and encouraged to see on page 69, 5.4, the number of incidents rather than incidences, the number of fly tipping incidents. And I was wondering, has any publicity been given to these ne'er-do-wells who commit these felonies, so to speak? Because I'm sure that it would show us in a good light. And people do ask me, because being in Barming, we've got Barming Woods, we have fly tipping, and they say, oh, nobody ever gets, you know. So can we have a bit of information? Would you know offhand? If not, I'm happy to be advised outside the meeting.
If that's okay, I'll follow that up outside the meeting. I can send it round to all members. But yeah, you're right. If we're looking at behaviour change, we should be publicising when we get these people to encourage people not to do this. Yeah, okay, I'll follow that up.
Members, anybody else want to say anything? Yes, Councillor Bryce.
Just very briefly, and it's probably not strictly relevant here, I'm probably at the wrong committee, but on the fly tipping, is it possible to have like a heat map, or do you do that analysis just to look at if there's a particular area? That would be super useful. I don't know if it goes to another committee, so apologies for wasting time if it does, but I think we might just find that quite useful to see if there's particular hotspots. Personally, I feel like our ward is, but then I'm sure every ward member feels like that. So.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, we can certainly do that. We've got that information, so I'll get it circulated.
Members, nobody else is indicating. Does anybody wish to move the recommendations? Yes? Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, I'm happy to propose the recommendations as they stand.
That's seconded. Councillor Gooch was first. Members, do you wish to take these separately, because we have three to note, and then there's a third which says identify any action that needs to be taken or amendments to the quarter four. Nobody has recommended any amendments as such. So, members, do you wish to take all of these as stated on the pages? Could I have together a show of hands, though, please? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And I will endeavour to go to the right page now and the right report, which is item 16, page 113. Thank you. Thank you for report of the Director of Finance and Business Improvement, medium-term financial strategy. So, Mr. Green, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The purpose of this report is to set the scene for the annual update of the medium-term financial strategy. So it goes through the national context, our corporate objectives as a council, the current position, because we now know the outturn for financial year 16-17 and likely pressures in 17-18. We go through the sources of funding that we have as a council, the capital programme, the level of reserves and the risks that we face. And there's a few things I'd like to highlight. First of all, the national position, very uncertain. The report says, and bear in mind this was written before the Queen's speech, that it's possible the new government will take the opportunity to reconsider 100% business rates retention. There was nothing about that in the Queen's speech, so the future of local government funding after 2019-20 is still very much up in the air, so a great degree of uncertainty there. So far as the current position is concerned, the position's a bit more certain than it was 3 months ago, because we do now have the outturn from last year, and I'm pleased to say that we came in within budget, just within budget for the year. So that gives us a bit more certainty about the things that are under our control. We've also done a review of the savings that are due for delivery in 17-18. Most of them are on track, but we do have a number of pressures which are mentioned in the report, particularly around homelessness and planning. So that's the current position. I'd also draw your attention to the summary of the risks that we face, and I've attached to this report the Budget Risk Register, which is reviewed by each meeting of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee. And the risks in particular that are highlighted here are the loss of income from planning fees owing to the delay in implementation of the relevant legislation, and more generally the local government funding environment, which I've talked about. The other appendix summarises the position for last year in the form of a narrative report. This forms part of the statement of accounts. And we've gone this year for what I hope is a much more user-friendly presentation of the results. That's starting on page 143. So, to summarise the position we're in, maybe slightly better off in terms of what we can control, but we're operating in a very uncertain environment. So, as far as the medium-term financial strategy is concerned, we need to be flexible, and in our planning, we'll reflect that by looking at a number of different scenarios for the future and trying to cover as many as possible of the angles that we could face. And the approach that we're going to take is set out in the timetable on page 126. Step one will be to update the projections using that scenario planning approach that I've talked about. And then from September, we'll start working on detailed budget proposals based on what projections tell us about any budget gap that we may face. So that work will happen during the course of the autumn, and then we'll be coming back to members in the individual committees with budget proposals in December and January prior to presenting a draft budget for 18-19 to you. So you're asked to note the issues and risks that we face in updating the medium-term financial strategy, the broad assumptions that we're making, and specifically to agree the approach that's set out in the timetable on page 126. Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
Mr Green, can I ask you to turn to page 117, please? Now, my memory tells me that with Moat Park Cafe, there was a little bit of angst over the budget that was originally set for the income that the cafe would produce. And I thought there was a huge overspend to the tune of about £300,000. Then in 2.17, it says growth of 96,000 has been built into the budget for 2017-18. So what I'm trying to work out in my head is we had this huge overspend of 300,000, but now you're saying that's changing going forward? Can we just have a little bit more detail on that, if that's okay?
Certainly. The overspend was never 300,000. The most that it looked as though it could be was 200,000. And that arose partly because we had been quite ambitious in 16-17 in the income targets that had been set for the cafe. So it was assumed that it wouldn't just break even, it would also make a profit, roughly speaking, of 100,000. So that projected overspend, in the end it wasn't as much as 200,000, but it was partly that we didn't make the profit, but we didn't even manage to break even. Now, the target for 17-18 has been to get back to a break-even position. We accept that it's going to be very difficult to move from a loss to a profit. So that's why we built 96,000 of growth into the budget for 17-18. So that was basically saying, for 17-18, we'll forget about the target of making a profit. We'll just aim to break even. And as it happens, the performance of the cafe is much improved this year on last year. We monitor the figures literally on a daily and weekly basis. So we're looking at the moment in good shape to achieve break even and therefore to achieve the budget. And longer term, clearly we've got to assess whether it's realistic to achieve the profit that had originally been anticipated. But basically that's the position. We were over-ambitious in the profit targets for 16-17. We've corrected that in the budget for 17-18, and we've also achieved an improvement in the actual operating performance so far this year.
Okay, but here you've got growth of 96,000.
Sorry, it's accounting terminology. Basically what that's saying, another way of putting it is to say that we've reduced the budget by 96,000, or the budget for income precisely. So that's basically what that is. It's not growth in the extent of meaning growth in income, it's reducing the income budget.
Mr. Green, I accept that, but I think there's probably one or two around the table who are sitting there saying, I don't get that. You're talking about breaking even, but then you're mentioning growth in the same paragraph. So I think there is just an element of how the public sector presents its accounts. That's all I'm trying to highlight.
I can certainly circulate a table setting out how the figures are arrived at to provide greater clarity on that.
Would all committee members like to see that? All right, thank you, Mr. Green. We'll ask for that. Councillor Harwood, you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to direct members to page 119, para 2.31, and that's where it's talking about the underspend, and it's talking about putting the £89,000 into the general fund balances for further one-off expenditure. It then goes on to talk about the fact that the capital programme has a number of projects allocated under a Home for Everyone and the regeneration of the town centre, but there are no allocations currently identified under Clean and Safe, which I think is, comes out time and time again as the highest priority or one of the higher priorities of the public. Because of the sums involved for some of the more ambitious projects around town centre regeneration and so on, I think that's where money from Community Infrastructure Levy and Section 106 and so on, big bucks are levered in. However, if we're looking at the underspend, we've just been talking about the fly tipping issue. 10 or 11 years ago, we had real success in basically stopping fly tipping in its tracks in Maidstone. And that was through tough enforcement-led campaigns, particularly where we were having multi-agency checks and we were pulling vehicles over, checking for their waste transfer notices, and actually kind of pursuing them. And word got around, it made a difference. I don't know if we can have some sort of a reference back to the relevant service committee to state that we do not have a capital bid, if you like, for their and that we make a suggestion that they look at an enforcement-led project, particularly around fly tipping.
Mr. Cornell, would you like to comment on that at all?
Well, there is capital expenditure for the environmental services within the current financial year, and the sort of investment in new vehicles and different projects. So I think that is taken care of.
Yeah, I think, if I may, this is about specific one-off projects, and I think that's exactly where we can frame that sort of an intervention and use the available resources, and I think make quite a big difference.
Right. Committee, would you like to, do you agree with Councillor Harwood that we could make a reference to the Communities Committee to say that could they specifically take a look at fly tipping in view of the fact that we do know that it has increased again? Councillor Burton?
I think that kind of wraps up into the much bigger subject of enforcement. That's one element. Environmental enforcement and you know, I think my latest understanding of that was, you know, there would be a wrap up within the planning review that would look how resources might be spread around. So, you know, I totally support moves to enforce issues around fly tipping, but it's a much bigger pot of issues, and I wouldn't like to pick that one out on its own at this stage.
Members, I've seen some nods, but not universally, to what Councillor Burton has said. It isn't an issue for us to look at specifically, the fly tipping. It is relevant to communities. If we feel that more should be done, leave enforcement aside for a moment, if we feel more should be done to look at fly tipping, the only way we, other than what's already here, the only way we can do it is with a reference to communities. Do you want to make any reference at all, Councillor Bryce?
I think overall, when we looked at the KPI, am I right that we actually met the KPI for fly tipping? We were just going to look at a particular, we were going to look at how that fell out. So, I mean, I'm happy to look at that heat map, and then maybe that would inform something that maybe a few of us would like to take to communities as a separate issue. I don't know if that would be a way forward rather than placing it in here as a commitment, because I think if we met the KPI, it may be a particular issue in a particular area that may need a particular response, although, you know, I hear what Councillor Harwood's saying.
We do have the chair of that particular committee here who may wish to say something. We could always also say that certain money should be invested under clean and green. So over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Chair of G, we're quite happy to take this on board further. We had a long discussion about fly tipping at our last meeting, and I think it's something that we need to look at a bit further. So quite happy to take it.
So may I make a suggestion to officers that the document that is going to be sent to us is also communicated to the committee members of that committee as well, so that people have that information to hand? And then if the chairman is happy to take that forward, that we just leave it in his capable hands. Thank you. We'll do that. Do you want to come in?
Not on that point, but another point. On page 118, item 223, I just wondered if there is an underlying issue with the parking at Moat Park.
Certainly last year there was an underachievement on the car parking income at Moat Park, but for this year the parking fees have gone up and the car park is very busy, so I don't think it's going to be repeated this year. I think we'll come in at least on budget for 17-18.
Are you happy with that? Right. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I'd like to follow on from that with 3 points about parking. The first one is that it says that we've got a higher than expected income. What areas is that from? Is it from PCNs or from paying display machines? What was the cause of that higher than expected income? Followed on by, given that it's been increased so much, and further in the report we say there are increasing pressures on the parking department in yellow pages, how can they then be expected to make £300,000 worth of savings? And then the third one was on the graph on page 134, it looks like parking's in the negative. How is that report designed for parking? It looks like it's gone backwards. I'm assuming it's just my understanding.
Mr. Green.
I'll try and deal with your points one by one, Councillor Harvey. The first one, in relation to the position on parking, most of the surplus and the additional income is on pay and display car parks, and the full breakdown is given in the papers that were seen by SPS and T committee, because that's the service committee that monitors parking income. The reference in Yellow Pages to car parks, I think, is slightly different. I mean, maybe when we get to the report, you can pick that point up, but there isn't an issue about the revenue generation from parking income, and it's factored into any loss of parking income is factored into any business cases that we put forward in relation to the kind of projects that are set out on the Yellow Pages. And I think the final point that you raised was on page 134, and I thought long and hard about how to present this information, and I can see what you mean if you say that parking looks as though it's going backward, because the bar chart shows, I think what you mean is that the bar chart shows the bars going over onto the left-hand side for parking. But if you look at the bottom of the table, you see that that represents net income from parking and transportation. So all the other services have net expenditure, so the bars are over on the right-hand side. Parking actually generates a surplus, so it's showing the bars on the other side. So actually it's a positive picture for parking, quite the contrary to what you were saying.
If I might say so, this is the old conundrum that Councillor Blackmore and I have raised over and over again about local government, where a minus usually means a plus. And we have to get used to it, unfortunately. Does anybody else have? Yes, Councillor Bryce, and then Councillor Gooch. All right, Councillor Garden, I've got you as well.
Sorry, it's a really tiny thing. On the graph, I think it's because you've got income underneath it, so it's either negative expenditure or positive income. So I think maybe just take off the income label. And then just on page 150, and this is the pedant in me as well, what I do for a living, but your weighting on the risk likelihood for probable, I think, should be a weighting factor of 4, not 2, because you're unlikely to get a weighting factor of 2. But I know how much breadth you're covering in this report, so it's, you know, there's a huge amount of detail here, so thank you very much for putting it together.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to echo what Councillor Bryce has just said, there's a huge amount of detail in the updated risk register, and I have to say, I do find it helpful and almost perversely reassuring that we're actually recognising as many risks as we can and looking at how we manage those risks and the likelihood of them happening. Because I know that I started the beginning of the year, a few things had cropped up, quite major expenditure that really had me seriously worried. But having it put into this perspective, I find very helpful. Thank you very much for the work that you've put into it. And I would also like to comment on the narrative report. First of all, a general comment. Not only this report, but some of the other, if I can say, public documents, so to speak. For example, we had the equality policy and objectives earlier on in the papers, and strategic plan, action plan or something. What I've noticed that in these documents, and it's a pity that Mrs Woodhouse isn't here, I noticed their presentation was very clear. I found myself being interested in reading them. And I have to say that because it is a chore, let's face it, when you've got 1,000 other things to do. But I think somehow the presentation has improved, but you haven't told us that it has. And I'd just like to say that I've noticed it, Thank you very much. It's plain, it's simple, and some of it might be in colour, but I'm sure it has reproduced very well in black and white. I like the use of pictures of Maidstone, but I wonder, I assume this is going into the public domain on the website perhaps, would it be possible, I'm looking at a picture of Oast houses, for example, on page 137, I'm wondering where that is. I think one of the photos is in Staplehurst. Ha-ha, your eyes have lit up, Councillor Bryce, I know you. But I do think that we could do a backhanded support of the rural Maidstone by just putting in small print where those pictures are. On the wording on the narrative, I'm trying very hard not to be picky, but I am aware that there can be a feeling amongst our ward members in rural areas that everything's town centre focused. So I'm wondering if, when we talk about Maidstone, and I very much like the way this is all worded, on page 130, we're saying, with nearly 7,000 businesses, we have the largest economy in Kent. I'm wondering if we could nip in borough-wide somewhere, just so that we're, to prove to ourselves maybe that we're not being town-centric, and to try to recognise that that people outside the rural, the urban areas are being included. I'm just trying to be inclusive I don't want to miss a trick, really. But that's the only comment. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Do you wish to say anything or just say noted? Thank you. Councillor Garden?
Oh, sorry.
Madam Chairman, I would like to ask Mr. Green about the perceived risks regarding page 122, paragraph 2.46, capital programme. The capital programme plays a vital part in delivering the Council's strategic plan. And whenever I see some thing where the Council tries to become a market participant, alarm bells go off in my little eyes. The particular point I want to raise is commercial property investment. Now, I did read a few economic articles recently where local authorities were warned that this is very much another Icelandic money get rich quick or lose your money quickly scheme. So could Mr. Green please enlighten us on the risk of these schemes?
Thank you, Councillor Garton. You're absolutely right that the risks that some local authorities are taking on have been flagged up, and it's certainly the case that some local authorities are heavily borrowed and have borrowed in order to acquire shopping centres and the like. We are in a very different position here in Maidstone because at the moment we have no borrowing. We do, on current projections, plan to borrow in the future, but it will be borrowing for projects that can demonstrate a return, and we're very careful about making sure the business cases stack up. On the specific point about commercial property investments, there was a report to this committee back in March on a specific investment that we made in the current year, which yields a return of around 7%, and it really was too good an opportunity to miss because it was well worth doing. As you'll see from the outturn report, we're holding a fair amount of cash at the moment, which is only generating 0.5% if we're lucky. So it does make sense to go into those investments if we can be confident about the return. And you're absolutely right about the risks, but we do take those very seriously and weigh up any investments that we make very carefully.
Has that answered your question, Councillor Garton?
Indeed, I have to take his careful words at face value at the moment. Obviously, I am concerned about the depressed commercial property market at the moment, and I'm sure you're aware of that. Let's address it at a later stage in the same forum.
I'm going to ask Councillor Burton to come first because, Councillor Blackmore, you've had, I think, 2 bites at the cherry. I'll let you come in after Councillor Burton, if you would please.
Thank you, Chair. So I think we've established there's some lovely pictures in this and the graphics represent the data extremely well. But when I read this in its entirety, there are alarm bells ringing left, right and centre. It kind of comes out to overall it's about right. But some of the budget assumptions, and if you look at the strat planning budget portfolio, you know, the core spend on planning was massively over, thankfully helped out dramatically by additional parking income. Balance is out all right, but it's a way off of what we actually forecast. So if you look at the previous report and museum footfall is down, and we look there about some budget information about the museum for the year moving forwards. You know, officers have done the right thing. I think you've got authority to move budget from one column to another up to 100,000. So we've, you know, carefully moved 96 on the cafe thing to spread that out. But if you look at some of the assumptions, they were way out. And it just sends alarm bells for the next budgeting, well, the current year that we're in and moving forwards as to how we've really got to scrutinise these things. So I don't want to be prophet of doom and gloom. It comes out all right at the, you know, the last figure on the last page, but if you read into it, there's all sorts of really concerning pressures there. You know, I'll flag up, for example, you know, we're going to be 120,000 short on the money we haven't got because the white paper didn't go through and we couldn't put up planning fees, and we're building up all of these pressures, and they're happening around us now. So we can look at this and say, yeah, that's all right, but read into it a bit more carefully, and alarm bells are ringing everywhere.
Councillor Burton, perhaps along with me, you would like to try and persuade those councillors who still believe that we have money in our back pockets, that that is not the case, and that we are facing very difficult times. But Mr Green, would you like to just respond on that score?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Burton is correct. We do face a lot of risks, and for that reason we monitor revenue budgets very carefully. Last year we had overspends, as you say, but through careful monitoring and freezing spending where appropriate, we did come in within budget in the end. I think it just shows we have to keep a very close eye on the numbers and make sure that we do take on board your points.
I have Councillor Blackmore and Councillor Harper, and then I believe we should move to the recommendations. Councillor Blackmore?
The narrative report for 2017 refers to red, amber, green ratings, but unfortunately, because it's all in grayscale, I can't actually tell which is what colour. Is it possible just to have that report sent by email, please, so that I can look at it on the screen and print it on my printer? Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Just a comment, really. It's on the risk register. It is the biggest challenge I think we've got facing us over the remainder of the financial period is this lack of clarity from the government in terms of funding. Everything up until June seemed to be steering one direction. We were going to get a change in the business rates and all the rest of it, and now of course that's all come screaming to a halt. And it looks like in the next couple of years there's no proposals in the Queen's speech, as far as I'm aware, for any of that to happen. And so since it's a 2-year period, that takes us up to, 2019. So things aren't going to happen in 2019, 2020. The legislation's not even being presented to Parliament. I think we're facing a situation where it's going to be really incredibly difficult for this council, let alone any other council in the country, to budget beyond 2018, 2019, because you've got no idea what the circumstances we're facing. We've got a government that's totally unstable, and it's a question of how long does it stagger on for, which is probably more of an indication, it's more of an indication it's unlikely legislation is going to come forward during the next couple of years. You know, you've got the DUP, which holds the purse strings to this government, and if you look in the if you look in Northern Ireland, they actually don't even have the council tax system, for instance.
Hang on a minute.
So,
we're not going to talk about national politics here.
No, I'm not.
I'm
talking about the impact on this council.
But the impact is.
And I would urge that perhaps this local authority, together with others, through the local authority association, tries to seek some clarity with the government and with the relevant ministers in terms of their proposals for local government funding. Because for local authorities such as us, and well, every single one throughout the whole UK, to be facing a situation where when we get up to the end of, as I say, 2018-19, at this stage we haven't got a clue what we're going to be doing beyond that. So, you know, we could either put a line of, you know, millions and millions in our figures beyond that point, or zero. How are we supposed to work on a medium-term financial strategy when, you know, the whole thing has been based on, you know, all the assumptions which the government was previously giving, and now which have all been taken away? I mean, I think some pressure needs to be put on in terms of getting the government to give some clarity to organisations like us.
Two things, and I'm not going to let anybody else come back other than me. The first thing is that most of you will already know that the elections for the Local Government Association have just taken place. I hope you all voted and you've got the people in that you want into those positions within your own political groups. And quite rightly, pressure is already being put on government to give us some clarity as we move forward, and I would suggest that our local organisations should do likewise to lobby our own members on the LGA and say how important it is that we actually press government to give local government some surety as we move forward. We were already, not just us, all councils were already facing a difficult situation, and what has happened, without making any comment on it, has made the future muddier at this precise point in time. I'm sure, Mr Green, that we are actually being extremely prudent in the way we're looking at this. Is a yes.
Yes.
Members, there are 3 recommendations. Oh, by the way, Councillor Blackmore, the papers are already online if you wish to access them, the papers you requested.
Okay, could someone just send me the link, please? Is that all right? That's all I need.
Yes, we will do that. There are 3 recommendations on page 113. Nobody has chosen to move them yet, but nobody said they have anything else to add or any amendments they wish to make. Are you happy if I take them 1, 2 and 3 all together? Yes? So can I have a show of hands for those in agreement? Thank you very much. That is noted. And a show of hands in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you know, I thought we all thought we saw all the hands go up. So no, all right, can we just have that clarified then?
Yeah, so that's 14 for, 1 abstention and none against.
Thank you. Now we move to agenda item 17. On page 151, which again I turn to Mr Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This covers some of the same ground as the previous report, so I'll try and avoid repeating myself. The report sets out the outturn for 2016-17 for both revenue and capital. As was said in the previous report, the overall position on revenue is a small underspend against budget of 89,000. The report sets out the detail for this committee in Appendix A. The other service committees have seen the figures relating to them. So far as this committee is concerned, the biggest adverse variance from budget came from from a lower than expected return on our balances. Obviously, interest rates were very low throughout 16-17, but there were positive variances from unspent grants, which are taken out in calculating the overall position, and an underspend on salaries, which helped us get to that overall underspend position. The report recommends that the underspend is set aside for one-off expenditure on the three key action areas, and as was mentioned in relation to the previous report, the focus may be on clean and green, as that wasn't so successful, hasn't had so much in the way of capital spend. You're also asked to approve the carry forward of grants unspent, which are set out in Appendix B. On the capital programme, there has been some slippage, mainly because schemes like Brunswick Street and Union Street have taken longer to come to fruition than was envisaged when the capital programme for 16-17 was originally set. The report also talks about the collection fund and our performance in collecting council tax and business rates, where we were slightly below target, and I'm working closely with Steve McGuinness and Revenues and Benefits on what we can do to improve our collection performance in the current year. And finally, the report deals with Treasury management, and there's an appendix setting out the position at the end of 16-17, where we were holding 16 million in cash. So the position's still cash positive and no need to borrow for the time being. So to sum up, you've got a number of recommendations on page 151. Most of them are asking you just to note the position, but you are asked specifically to agree to earmark the 89,000 underspend for 16-17 and to approve the slippage in the capital programme. So happy to answer any questions that members may have on the detail.
Councillor Harper.
I suppose a couple of things. First of all is actually one of the last points, which you just mentioned, was obviously we've got, on page 166, where it's just shy of £16 million in cash. And as you said earlier, look at those rates of returns. Very, very low on the whole. I just wonder if there is any option in terms of our treasury management to potentially look at how we might move out of cash into other assets. Now, I know we've been doing some work. Obviously, we've got things on the agenda later, but, you know, it's a lot of money to have sitting around earning very little for the authority. If there is options there, we could do something on that. And the other point is on recommendation 3 about this £89,000 underspend. Thinking about where we might want it to go, I don't know. I mean, I know you talked about cleaning, but I'm just thinking one of the biggest issues we face is around homelessness, and that's been a constant issue which we've been trying to address. So I would wonder whether the £89,000 would be better off being earmarked for our Homes for Everyone strategic theme, because that's almost inevitably going to lead to an overspend in that area in the current financial year. It's overspent every year for the last few years, so I wouldn't have thought this financial year is going to be any different with the pressures we've got on us.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. First, your question about our cash balances. Our treasury management approach is to make sure that the cash that we hold is, as far as possible, 100% secure. So we don't go for high rates of return where there could be greater risk of losing the cash. We do invest with top-rated banks. The other point to make is that because the capital programme envisages using our cash over the next year or so, we do keep the term of our investments quite short. So you'll see that the maximum term is 13, well, there is a small amount, relatively small amount for 2 years, but most of it is 13 months. we could get slightly higher returns by investing for longer, but given that we're going to need the cash if we spend according to what's set out in the capital programme, the investments have been kept at relatively short terms. So that's the rationale for the, if you like, quite conservative approach to investing that 16 million. On your second point about the 89,000, it's an officer recommendation, but the reason why we didn't put anything in specifically about homelessness was that there is quite a lot of work going on around our homelessness strategy, and we're investing in new properties to help address our obligations to house homeless families. So it was felt that because there was quite a lot going on in that area, we didn't need to have any specific recommendations about investing the 89,000 in homelessness.
Mr. Harper, Councillor Harper, I should say, can I just add to that this is very clear in that it does say, if the committee agree, that is, that it's earmarked to deliver the 3 key action areas, one of which is homelessness. And I think what is meant here is that money is already following the 3 key areas. So this is there for a sort of, if I can use the word, a catch-all if we need some. It could end up that it doesn't need to go anywhere. It could end up that it all goes in one direction. That will have to be agreed by the relevant committees when items come forward. But just to give you some surety that if you read the community's papers and follow what's happening, I think you'll find that we're well on the way, if not almost there, to achieving the money we earmarked, this committee said should go in a certain direction, is being well used. And I think maybe, Mr. Cornell, if you want to say just a few words, because That is then clearly carried. Right. Agenda item 19 is on page 172. It's a report just for noting. So can we please go to Mr. Foster to introduce this? Bear in mind, members, that if you do wish to discuss this, be careful what you discuss, because we go into part 2 on this very shortly.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, we completed the acquisition of the former Royal Mail Sorting Office site in September of last year in partnership with Kent County Council. And we've established the strategic board, which, members, if you remember, you gave delegated authority to deliver the business plan and the holding strategy for this site. Clearly, together, we've bought the site, the former Royal Mail Sorting Office site, with a view to seeing the comprehensive redevelopment of it and the adjoining Network Rail site, a gross area of around 10.5 acres. This is a complex site requiring partnership working with Network Rail and others, and will take some time to come forward with a fully worked up, viable, comprehensive scheme. As such, we have put together a short-term holding strategy, which has basically involved 4 income streams. So we have got planning permission to convert one of the warehouses to retail use for Demelza. The Undercroft car park has been licensed to Kent County Council, in part, for their staff to park. And we've converted what we call Warehouse 1, the larger warehouse and the yard area, for our pay and park car park. Those elements are in place now and operational, and we are now working on the refurbishment of the office, which is around 15,000 square foot fronting Sandling Road, and some adjoining warehouse space. So that's all in train. Obviously, that's just the short-term position. Longer term, what we're looking at doing is appointing a lead consultant. We've chosen to go down the Homes and Communities Agency's property panel framework. We've gone out with a sifting brief to the 13 property panel members, and we've had 4 expressions of interest to come forward and be our lead consultant. And we've sent out an invitation to tender, which closes on Monday, and we are looking to interview those panel members on the 12th of July with a view to appointing them, and then going through a phased approach. So looking at what we might be able to achieve in terms of viable mixed-use development, working that through to some sort of planning, either an outline planning or supplementary planning guidance. And then once we've achieved that, effectively attempted to de-risk the site, we will then go to the market. That's how we're setting out at the moment, and we'll see how that pans out over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. I think the rest of it is set out in the main body of the report, and I can touch on some of the income and revenue and capital figures once we go into part 2.
Thank you. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Talks on page 177 about stage 1, and there it talks about engaging with local members and others, because again, this is a very, very sensitive local site. I think I've stated before, there are significant concerns from local residents who live around the site in relation to traffic generation, current congestion, current air pollution problems, and road safety issues getting across roads in this area. There are real concerns about the whole traffic network in North Maidstone and the way it doesn't operate, and there are real concerns about, if you like, kind of overheating further through some of the rumours that are going around about what could potentially come to pass on this site. I think the absolute bottom line on this is that we must get the master planning right from the off. That there are constraints within this site that must be identified at the off, and we must do master planning, and we must be ambitious to bring forward a really high quality scheme which protects the local landscape, which protects the best features, the trees around the site and so on. Because if we go off half-cock, like we did a couple of years ago, where Maidstone Council was very heavily involved with Network Rail in putting in a planning application which was essentially just really to establish a principle, even though it was establishing a principle, because it looked like the back of the Pentagon Centre in Chatham, it really upset the locals. And I think we have to understand that this is a residential area and there are stakeholders in terms of the people who live around this site. And I just make a plea that for sensitivity, and that this is not a simple town centre regeneration. This is a residential neighbourhood on the edge of the town that this is an element of, and we need to bring the locals with us and the local elected councillors and so on with us, or it will become very problematic. I mean, we just talked about one problematic site on the rural edge. This is one on the urban edge of North Ward that does cause problems. Thank you.
Councillor Harwood, I will ask Mr Foster to come in, but I can state quite clearly that both Mr Foster and Councillor Burton will confirm that I have raised the issue of local members' involvement from the beginning ad nauseam at every meeting. Mr Foster.
I was just going to say that, yes, it's been made very, very clear to me, and also clear to Kent County Council, our partners, that ward member involvement at stage 1 is paramount.
Councillor Blackmore, you were next. Yes, no, please do.
So, yes, it's clearly said ward members involved. Now, as you're aware, I sit on the strategic board alongside the leader of the council, and one of the points that I've made very clear is that this is actually a strategic site for the whole of Maidstone. It's a major gateway, it's a major investment for this council, and the strategic dimensions are huge, so that the member involvement, I believe, should not be restricted to only the local ward members. And I think Mr Foster will bear me out. I've made that point very strongly at every board meeting, and I am disappointed that that's not reflected in this report.
Mr Foster, I'm going to come back and say, because you supported me, that is quite true. You have made that point. I think both aspects of this can be adequately covered as we move forward. The ward members must be in on the ground floor. That's absolutely clear. And as we move forward, all councillors, because it is both a local and strategic site, have to also be involved.
That's where we differ, because you're saying, and when we move forwards, and I'm saying that it should be open to all member participation from day 1, ground floor. I don't think you'll have 55 councillors turn up, but I think the early day involvement should be open to all. This is a strategic site for Maidstone. It's a major investment. It is not purely a local ward matter.
Right, well, let's lay on the line what we're actually talking about here. Local members, local knowledge is something we seek to achieve and have at every stage throughout the borough. Throughout the borough. That's what we're talking about, with the local ward councillors being in there at the beginning. It is not appropriate for all councillors to be in the initial discussions where the knowledge of local councillors are being taken into account, but then we obviously, as it is a strategic site, we must get it out to all councillors. I'm not going to enter an argument here. We discussed this over and over again, Councillor Burton. I'm giving an assurity as leader of the council that the ward councillors will be satisfied in their request, as will the wider councillor groups. So we will cover both aspects and we will do it well. And I'm looking to Mr.
Well, as
Foster.
an equal member of that board, I am putting the alternative position, and maybe this committee needs to comment further.
Mr. Foster, do you wish to say anything? No, I'm going to ask the Chief Exec to say something.
Okay, so also being a member of the board, I can vouch for the fact that this has been very thoroughly aired, and the board is perhaps the place where some of those things will get, the detail of those things will get resolved. I think it's really important that there's a commitment to engagement with local members, the widest group of members possible, and local people. And so we will be providing advice about how that can be achieved in practice. I do think it's important that the entire process is as open and transparent as possible, because there may be people that we don't know of now. We don't know what we don't know in terms of people who wish to engage. So if I might suggest that the detail of that is perhaps thrashed out within the board, but there is, I think, a commitment from everybody that it will be done in a thoughtful and constructive way.
And that's precisely how I understand it, Councillor Burton. I'm going to go to Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was actually going to move the recommendation on page 172, and then that way we can move on to the next item, which actually talks about the finance and all the other issues that are happening, because really this part is just for noting, and then we can move on to the proper substance. Thank you.
Councillor Bryce, did you wish to say anything or hold it for the next part?
Well, just very quickly, I think it's just the detail given in stage 1 on page 177. That's the paragraph, I think it's the second bullet, isn't it, which references particularly councillor involvement. And it only mentions local ward member involvement, which is obviously key, given the local knowledge and the impact, etc., etc. But it's just in, and I know it's because it's further down the line, but then stage 2 and stage 3 obviously don't give that level of detail. So I think maybe just in stage 1, there just maybe needs to be an insert on, that there will be something accessible to all councillors should they have a particular interest or sit on a committee with a particular interest. So I think it's just because it doesn't specify it anywhere else. It just refers to local ward members only.
It is in there. It does say it.
It just says local. It doesn't refer to a point back where we come back and all councillors can have a look. I'm sure it's implied, but or have I missed it?
If I can just clarify, Madam Chairman, it certainly is the intention that both ward councillors and councillors are engaged in stage 1. Exactly how they're engaged, whether they're engaged together, whether they're engaged ward members first and councillors afterwards, I'm more than happy to be guided by the strategic board. Thank you.
I'm moving to the vote. It's not to vote, sorry. It's just to note. So is that noted, members? Right. We are going to move on, but I do think all of us could benefit from 10 minutes. So it is 22. I would like everybody back here on the dot of 10:02, please. We will start on the dot. Members, can I call you all to order, please? Members? Okay. Are we ready, please? Hurry up. Members, I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the items set out in Part 2 of the agenda because of the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified having applied the public interest test. Could you remember, please, to turn these